Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tea with TPS. Today, our distinguished guest is Indira Kaur Ahluvalia. She is the author of a book called Fast Forward to Hope, and the subtitle is Choosing to Build the Power of Self. So, from the title itself, you would have guessed what it is all about. It is about a struggle. It's also about victory. It's about success. So, the book gives you a picture of what she went through. When we saw her last, many years ago, she was a young bride, beautiful, enthusiastic, energetic, enterprising, running her own company, and ready for enjoying life. But after that, she went through what can be described only as a tsunami in her life. But the creditable thing about her is that she has survived. Of course, in these days of pandemic, survival has become the only way of success. If you are not success, not if you do not survive, there is no meaning in success. If you are not alive, what is the point of achieving anything else by anybody else? But in your case, of course, it was a different time frame, different context. Maybe you wondered, why me? That's a question that always arises. But there is no, you cannot find any logic in that. But there are also other reasons why we invited her. She belongs to a family who was closest to us in Washington. There was not a single week or a single month when we did not get together. In fact, her father and I played golf. That is the biggest kind of comradeship you can have. Once you are your golf partner, it's like joining a church. You share many things, you enjoy company, you suffer each other's bad golf, everything. And you are not supposed to cheat when there are a lot of opportunities for cheating in golf. Then I played golf with her, with your brother Monty, who of course didn't have time to play with us all the time, but he condescended to come and play with us. Of course, he played much better golf than both of us. And then, of course, we knew your mother, close friend of my wife, and was inherited the so-called Karuna Empire. And she is doing a very good job. Then we know Monty's wife, her children. So it's a very close family. So what happened to you is very close to us. It is like what happened in our own family. So we kept following it. And when the book came, I was very anxious to read. And I'm fully convinced by the book that you have been really heroic and have been very, very determined. And that is the story I'd like to convey. I think your book has two parts. One is the gruesome experience of going through the diagnosis, each time hoping for the best and getting the bad news. That must have been very painful. I do not want to go through that because that is something familiar to many people who have been through it. But the second part of the book is very revealing in many ways. And that is what I would like to people to read and understand, and the message that you give, sometimes explicitly, but sometimes very, very subtle way. And so I thought that this book is something that people must read. And that was the reason why I thought I would invite you to this program. I have this book chat program occasionally whenever I come across something interesting. So what I see you today, Indira, is a different Indira that I have seen when I left you. But today you look as fresh, as healthy, as bright, as beautiful as before. And that is a very consoling thought. So welcome to my program.
Uncle, thank you so much. It's like sitting in the intimacy of your home with family, talking about truth and what gives us joy in life. I am so honored, so touched that, my father's friend my family thinks the story is something that we can share. I know that, when you write a book, when you talk from a perspective of pain, you don't want to cause those you care about pain. And I think I think you allude to that. This is a difficult read for people who know me and love me. But I think there's also, as you say, so much to celebrate in the journey of life, even through crisis. And to get to the other side of it, I'm really touched by this opportunity, Uncle. Thank you.
Good. Your medical oncologist, Dr. Fred Smith, said about the book. This is an inspiring read for the author, family, friends, and all who are touched by the diagnosis of breast cancer. So he must have seen many, many cases. But this particular case seems to have touched him even more than the others, that's obvious, in his foreword. So that could be our beginning. And first of all, what was your motivation in writing this? Was it just to recall all that you went through, merely to record it maybe for posterity, for your children, for other people who face such situation? Or was it to convey a message to the world that there is a way out of any situation? And once you are out of it, it makes no difference. A bad experience and good experience are very painful and very joyful at that time. But years later, they all get counted as just experience. And so that is one good thing about humankind. We have the ability to forget, the ability to get over the worst trauma in your life. So, what was the basic motive? Why did you think that this book will be useful to the society?
It's an evolving process. A long time ago when I started the journey, um, my cousin, who's a publisher, actually said, "You should journal. You'll get a lot out of that experience, and from what you learn, you might be able to share." You have so much going on. The last thing you want to do is record it, right? It's hard enough going through it. But it planted a seed that there was something to be given from what I had been given myself. And it was a sense that stayed with me. My children, Uncle, as you remember, were 5 and 3 when I got the diagnosis, which is too little for them to know which way is up. But they are children, as you know, are also very astute. Their language isn't words. It's the emotion that they feel in the body of the people that they care about. And there's a lot of unanswered questions. And, my children, just like anybody else's, are not going to sit down for hours on end to learn about what I've learned in life. And in some ways, my desire was to share with them what they had experienced but not understood. And as I thought about that, that continued to percolate in me. As they grew older, they had different experiences that could be tied back. So in some ways, it was to fill in those blanks. But also, my parents have strived and created in me and Monty certain ways of living life. And you also want to pay that forward. And as I thought about sharing my blueprint, as I've been guided by my family, by my elders, by what I've learned in my life, you want to kind of provide it to your children so they can sidestep some of the challenges. And in writing it, I realized that there was broad application. It wasn't just discussing it from a personal perspective, but it was universal in that challenge and human frailty is something we all experience in different ways. It doesn't have to be cancer, but the determination with which you get through crisis and not let that experience hold you, but how you release that experience and still retain what you've gained as a result of living it, um, was that balance. I realized that I had to find a way to serve.
Did you give up in between at any stage that you wouldn't do
Not,
this?
not for a second, not today, not then. There was no
Not even a
question.
writer's block at some stage? No.
No, in terms of writing or life. I mean, with both, with life, never for a second. The diagnosis, as you know, is advanced breast cancer with bone metastases. It was stage 4 when we discovered it in April through May 2007. There was no question that I was not going to give up. You know, it was like a Bollywood moment, right? Uh, there was no discussion, there was no negotiation. It was an understanding I had already reached with my God that I would raise my children.
So
Uh,
you started this only after you recovered?
I started writing this book right through COVID. I started writing in July, and I think I wrote it almost as a steady, short flow, and it came from the spirit. It took me all these years from when that seed was planted to this period here when I was spiritually and emotionally ready to experience it again. Because the only way for me to tell the story is by experiencing my truth again. What I had to do was experience it so I could then get to the other side with the reader.
Right. And you speak of a sense of satisfaction when the book came out. You know, I saw your picture with the loads of these books packed and with a smile on your face. What was that satisfaction about? Was it because you wrote a literary piece? Do you see yourself as a writer? Have you written before?
You know, I've written in for some different subjects for work. I've journaled, but I haven't written a book before. Um, I think the satisfaction came from the perspective that this was within me and now it had released and was free. And it
And you
was
had a sense of relief that the story has been told, did you?
I did, because you know, as I alluded to in the beginning, one of the reasons you had to be spiritually ready to write it. But you also, when you're writing a memoir and you're writing from truth, you worry a little bit about how it'll be received, certainly from a perspective of judgment, but also you're putting truth out there that you protected your family and friends from. And so you don't necessarily want to expose that to them after you spend a good amount of this experience protecting them. The the goal, however, was in telling the truth, perhaps it was going to be a release for all of us. So the relief I felt was I could stand by my decision because I felt I had been authentic and my intentions were pure.
Yeah, that is important, particularly when it is a medical topic. Maybe doctors might think that you misunderstood something or it is not credible or things like that. That is one danger. In any case, any writing of autobiography, you're always worried that people might misunderstand you. You know, I write a lot, and I often see that people don't read the way I intended them to read it. And so they criticize you or praise you for things you are not really responsible. So that is the danger of autobiographies. If you are writing some creative literature, yes, that's fine. You can go any way you like. But you'd like to be authentic. And the other thing, I dedicated my first book, which was a comprehensive autobiography, as it were, to my two grandchildren. I had only two at that time. Then I said to my grandchildren and also to the unborn ones. I knew there would be more coming. And now I have one more. And in fact, my son was telling me today that when I mentioned something in the context of my conversation with you, he said, "Do you know, Daddy, my children feel that they know more about your childhood than my childhood because they have
That's
been
true.
reading the book and underlining and putting question marks because they're reading about a world which they never knew, a village in India, the kind of circumstances in which four boys grew up, and all that is absolutely unknown to them. But now they are absorbing it. Now they know where they come from. You know, so So that's a very satisfying thinking.
And it's a
But the
gift.
most important thing about this book and about your own life is faith. Vahe Guru is the refrain all over. When do you say that in your prayers?
It's a conversation. It's an ongoing conversation with a
No, when you
friend.
say Vahe Guru, like we say Sri Rama or whatever,
Right.
how does
In
it
what
come to you?
context? It comes in there's no specific space that it doesn't come into. It's,
You
it's
actually say
certainly,
it, or you just think about it like a mantra?
it's even more innate than a mantra in some ways. It's, it's a, it's a moment of connection where I am catching my breath or gaining strength or enjoying a beautiful moment. It's always been part of who I am. It's not something I've cultivated. I've been very fortunate in that this relationship with Vaheguru has been simple.
No, like I have a favorite goddess. We have a home, family. So it's a Devi,
That's,
it's it is Durga,
that's
Durga's
right.
image. So whatever comes to me, good or bad, I immediately
Yeah.
say, oh, Devi.
Yeah.
So, I suppose this is similar to that.
Indeed. Indeed.
And you were brought up as obviously belonging to a Sikh religion. You didn't choose it. You were born into a Sikh family and
Yeah.
inherited this tradition. But how is it that has been so deep in you, in spite of the fact that you lived abroad, you saw various religions, various styles, and some of you may look at Sikhs as some kind of unknown people. Why are they dressed like that? So,
Right.
but you have overcome that. I know that your father and your brother, they still have their headgear.
And my
So
children.
also, yes. So
Yeah.
that means that this is with you as a, what shall we say, a gift, rather than something that you feel that you are stand out among the other people. You don't get that sense, do you?
No, it's I think my father has a lot to do with it. In the way that he wore his turban was very natural. It was a part of his whole persona. There was never a moment where I felt he was putting it on and taking it off. Similarly, my son, when he was a little child, he did stick figures with Jura, a top knot on his head. It was, I think we've been very fortunate in that it's been a natural part of our being. We are a spiritual family, certainly. I've grown up but not even though we follow the form, we're not educated as much as we should be in the scriptures or in the practice. We live it inherently, but we wear it proudly because I think by wearing it as we do, we represent our values, which are fundamental to the way I've learned to live my life, which is with respect for the other, from a perspective of equality, standing up for what we believe is right, being of service to humanity. I grew up in Calcutta, which was an oasis because on the way to Loreto House, which was the school I went to from the time I was 4 years old, I would pass through this one street where I would first reach a mandir, and I would do my prayers in the right form. I would then get to a mosque and I would do the prayers in the right form. I would reach the Gurdwara and do it. And then I would get to church for the assembly at Loreto House. But already I had woken up hearing my father doing part in the morning. He did that without fail, morning and night. So religion or the practice or the experience of religion was never separate from me growing up. But there was always choice because as we recognized walking and driving through different streets, there was diversity in how people believed. But the beauty of the Calcutta I grew up in and that I'm so proud of is that you could you could belong everywhere, but you could hold on to the path that you so felt you were born into or you were most comfortable with. And so,
And in the United States, you did not have any discomfort.
oh, there's plenty of discomfort. I mean, but isn't that the point, right? Whether it is the color of my skin or the length of my hair, the question is, do you believe enough in what you stand for to make that more important? Papa had always said, if the problem lies in the other when they discriminate, right? Because it's how they see you, how you see yourself is totally different. You don't have to buy into the bias of the other. You can operate from the strength and the beauty of the completeness of every aspect of you.
And of course, the very fact that he went to the United States because of the same illness. So you were probably conscious of it right through, and you knew how he had coped with it. And that would have been another factor, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. He had a 2%, and I allude to this in the book. He had a 2% chance when he was first diagnosed in 1980 of walking out on a stretcher. And that was too much for him. There was no way he wasn't going to be alive, capable, and giving towards his family. When that's your grounding, you've already been coached in the game of life. And he also never stopped living, right? I mean, he always alluded with different, with the colostomy and, with the diabetes and losing his eyesight in one eye, he would continue to play that bad golf, as he said. It didn't matter. I mean, he ran a business, he contributed to society in different ways. So,
For a long time, I did not even realize that he had this problem. He was hitting balls longer than me in golf.
sure.
Because in golf, your body has to be perfect, to be able to play the game. And he did it.
I'm sure he would have loved to hear this right now, that he was hitting the balls longer than you.
He knows that. We are always competing. Some days I would win, the other days he might. So there was no problem about that. And I always concede. So, but that was not the point was that, like in anything else, the energy that he brought into it. And he never complained that, he didn't hit the ball right today because he has a problem. Because that problem never came up.
Because he always took responsibility. I mean, I think the one big lesson from him was you take responsibility for what you can control, right? You're not going to win every fight. You can't, but you do have the capacity to say, okay, I choose my reaction to a situation that I'm in. And he did it with grace. He did it with dignity. And he also did it without excuses.
Yeah, but he built his own business, brought the family up. He was prosperous enough. Everything suited him. The fact that he went to the United States, maybe he would not have gone if this had not happened. So there is some.
My mother was.
He was well established in Calcutta, wasn't he? He was well established.
Absolutely, he had a good placement at Metal Box. He was at the top of his game, Metal Box, and
I met many of his colleagues in India later, remembering him with great affection. Metal Box community was quite separated.
It was, and it was
very aristocratic.
The club life, Saturday club and Tolly and all of that good stuff. And, it's a very comfortable life where you're socially amongst your friends and family. So you're absolutely right. The primary reason he moved was to create financial stability for the family, because similarly to the situation in India, you might be, when you're a professional, you're not looking at that time, you weren't going to get a pension. Everything was paid through perk rather than salary. So creating sort of a financial base was something he took on as a personal obligation.
Well, that was a gamble because anything would have happened. But again, that shows faith in his own faith in his future, and that is what.
And I think that one other lesson that I allude to in the book, which really is attributed to him. You make decisions and then you act. You don't flounder while you're in the midst of the situation. because then that situation gets drawn out. He said, this is my goal. This is what I will achieve. I will live, I will provide, and I will live a good, happy, comfortable life with gratitude. And that, I think, has been his greatest legacy to our family.
And then you set up your own company while after working with him for some time.
Yeah.
And all that is, and so when all this happened, the support system in the family, I would credit them with your success, because I'm sure the support system must have been very strong, and that must have been a great encouragement for you.
No question. I mean, it's even more than a support system. It was, we were all in it together. We were all experiencing it together, and we were all taking care of each other. There was full transparency in what we were dealing with. And so there wasn't sugarcoating the situation, but there was also not, with each other, we weren't dwelling on the negative. I think internally, we all dealt with our own pain. But I was never alone for a single treatment. I was never alone for a single appointment. There was always food. There was always care. And it's not, it's certainly my family that bore the brunt of it. But, there were random strangers who overheard a conversation, who reached out to say they were praying for me. So the beauty of challenge is that if you open yourself up, there is support. I mean, I think that I am incredibly fortunate that my family is close-knit and willing to be together through crisis. But for folks who have different family systems or different family situations, their humanity is so vast and tremendous. You have to first make the decision whether you're open for this. And in our culture, Uncle, as you know, we don't always talk about hardship. We don't always talk about disease. We don't always talk about strife. It's a matter of saving faith. And I'm selfish from that perspective because I believe in the goodwill of people. I believe that in sharing is where we have the greatest humanity. And so by allowing myself to be vulnerable, I've created the space for us to be together. Because my experience may be caused by something different than yours, but you know where I've been, and I know where you've been. And I think that's what's been another incredible gift to me.
Yes, so the courage that you showed definitely came from that faith, because you are not alone. You had enough people to share, and at the same time, they did not show great sympathy or made you feel uncomfortable with that kind of feeling.
No, there was no pity, not from my family. There was, and there is people, and this is something that's interesting. I recently started thinking about the term well-intentioned. Well-intentioned is a double-edged sword.
Yeah, right. They
Because,
say the road to heaven is paved with good intentions, they say.
exactly. And so sometimes in this good intention, people say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, beta. I know things may not work out."
Yeah, right.
or they look at the person next to you, your family member, and they shake their head and they say, "We feel so bad this is
And
happening."
they'll tell you some stories of their own relatives who went, who couldn't survive.
Yeah.
These are, there are many stories. There are cancer survivors have written several books. We have a comedian who has written a comedy book on cancer.
Right. That I have to get. But I mean, I think
He and his wife got cancer together, and somebody went to the house and said, "Oh, you are made for each other, and that is why you both got it." This kind of comments.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
But you have to figure out what to take in, right? So when you see that look of pity, or you see that negative expectation that somebody has put on you, it's hard to not take that in, right? Because it's usually somebody who cares about you. So you have to kind of let it kind of skim the surface and say, if it enters my body, if it enters my spirituality or my consciousness, it'll alter where I can be. So, I mean, the one thing I always ask people is if you want to give love, but don't give concern.
Right. No, but earlier people used to keep this as a secret, basically because of these reactions. But that is not changed. That is changed now. People do share. And what is your assessment of the medical system in the US? Your experience? It's
I
the
think
most
that,
advanced country in the world. But during the pandemic, we found that the United States failed in the expectation that the world had about United States. So where did you find it absolutely, what shall we say, satisfactory?
well, I think the satisfaction comes from the fact that I'm alive, right? I think that,
No, but through the process.
yes, no, absolutely. And the reason I'm alive is because of one single drug. I mean, there was the toxic part of chemotherapy that was just to kill all the drugs. I mean, kill all the cancer cells. But there was one drug that had only recently come on the market and being approved, that I was fortunate enough to get cancer at a time when that drug was available. Now, the point about that is that drug is still not available everywhere in the world. So people with my condition do not survive. And it is about $12,000 for me to get treatment every 3 weeks, which I still continue to do. I wouldn't have started if I didn't have insurance, which in and of itself is a whole racket. I wouldn't have had life. So I think that
Many people in the world won't be able to afford it.
That's exactly right. The inequity in health, the profitability of the cancer industry, the silos in which research is kept, um, makes me wonder if that has slowed down creating the cure. Because if we have the capacity we do, then the mandate shouldn't be anything but full recovery of all people through cure. And so in the book, I've been a little provocative, and I've asked the question whether I'm worth more sick than well to the cancer industry. I come from a for-profit entrepreneurial background. So I don't have a problem with capitalism, but capitalism can also come with values. And if the mission is cure, there's still many ways to build profit.
So certainly your being in the United States helped immensely. That is for sure.
Completely.
Yeah, in fact, I had intended to ask you about the expenses. Were the insurance adequate to meet your costs?
Insurance, it depends on the insurance. And the job I do, and I will say this bluntly, is predicated on the type of insurance that company can provide. It has much less to do with whether I want to do that job. And there's a vast percentage of people who are driven by that, especially now in countries such as the US, where insurance is the prerogative. So insurance controls livelihood as much as the capacity of an individual to contribute what is truly their skill.
And also sense of security.
Absolutely.
So very important, because in India, the insurance system is still rather primitive. And therefore, it's more socialistic here in that sense. A lot of things are provided free for poor people and all that. Those systems don't exist elsewhere, not in the United States, definitely. So there is a constant fear of insecurity whenever the illness comes. Now that the pandemic is here, people don't know how they are going to survive, and people are making money. There's a lot of corruption. Oxygen is being sold, and the machine equipment is being sold at very exorbitant prices. So it's a very calamitous kind of situation that exists in India at the moment, which everybody acknowledges. But at the same time, there is some kind of a social safety net for the poorer people. They may not get the best medicines, but they get some treatment. In most cases, in the pandemic, in COVID 19, most people, if you go to a government system, there is no expenditure at all. So, such systems exist in India, so that may be this mix. But the sense of security that you have, this is not going to make you bankrupt, is something which I suppose keeps you alive.
Well, it does. I mean, and just for a moment to reflect on the situation in India, I mean, the suffering is beyond understanding. And it brings certainly, you know, we've all lost family through this, which is hard to take. But it also brings out the best and the worst of people, right? And, I had spent in the last couple of weeks, I spent 7 hours on the phone looking for 1 unit of plasma. And it's for a family member. The reality is that we are developed enough, sophisticated enough to have basic systems in place that protect the citizen. And so that failing is something that is not good enough. That is just not good enough. Whether that's in the US with COVID or in India. But the issue with insurance is I'm lucky that I have been able to get a job where the company can afford the kind of insurance that covers the cost in a way that's not making me bankrupt. Others don't have that. But over and above insurance that covers, a certain segment of the cost, there are additional costs that insurance does not cover. There's loss of days worked, there's a loss of income also over and above significant additional expenses. I mean, getting sick is a expensive situation in a way that it can make a life or death difference based on where you live. And whether you're in the US, even upstate New York doesn't have the kind of facilities and resources and expertise that New York City has, let alone in another.
One hears about all kinds of problems about medical system, the Obama care, and all kinds of things. One is not very sure how each one falls into what category. No, I just asked because it may be of interest to people to know, the kind of financial stress that this kind of thing brings about. How about the psychological one?
Oh, that's a heavy one. I did my undergraduate in psychology, but even if you were a therapist yourself, it doesn't prepare you. I mean, what you learn is in textbooks. When you see somebody else's experience, even if they're a loved one, you still don't own that experience. And I think a lot of my book is really, at least the first part, which is the discussion about the experience of getting cancer, is from an emotional gut perspective. And I think that most of the work that I've seen that other people have done on cancer speak to treatment or, the aftermath. For me, the most fundamentally important part of any situation, any calamity, any disease is tackling it before you get into it. And that period of the unknown, when you know something's not right, be it in a marriage or be it in your body or be it at work, we all know when something's not right, when it feels off. Then the process you go through to question yourself, to doubt yourself about whether there is a problem. Don't overreact. I have work to do. I have to take care of the children. I have to solve that problem till the pain gets worse. Till the point you get to the point where you say, can I afford this? Can I prioritize this? Can I make time for this? Can I take time off for this? And then you start that process of trying to go from pillar to post. Oftentimes people don't know where to start. Who do you call when you feel this pain in your breast or you have this situation evolve? At least in the medical field, there are doctors and specialists, right?
Right. And consultants.
and
various
consultants
categories.
that you continue to pay for.
Bills come from everywhere.
Yeah, it's
some
strange, but
some laboratory in Massachusetts and some in this and that. We have been through this. That's very shocking.
exactly. And it's months before sometimes you get diagnosed. It's months that you know that something is wrong, that you've been given an indication. You've had one biopsy, you need another biopsy, you need this blood test, you need to find this doctor. But they still won't commit till all the pieces of the evidence are lined up. And in this period, you know things are getting worse. And so your desire to act and your desire to move, especially when it's for somebody you love, the system becomes another responsibility. So not only do you have that physical pain, you have that emotional trauma and a sense of helplessness. And in that moment, Uncle, in that moment, if somebody holds your hand and says, you have a chance to fight, I believe in you, stay strong, keep it together, find the reason why you live, envision your future the way you want to see it, experience the good of what you want your life to be. All of a sudden, that tension lifts just a little bit. And that gives you the next breath. And in that next breath, you're able to fight for one more.
Yes, it is difficult to imagine because the person's own experience is all that one can admire and one can watch and one can study. But to sense it in the way one experiences it is very difficult at all. And the fact that you had so much of family support is something truly remarkable. How about about the public? You give two or three instances of kindness by ordinary people. The waitress in the Bombay club, or a cab driver, or a waitress at a bar in a train.
Yeah.
Kind of, these seem to have touched you. And how did that happen? How is it that?
This is humanity at its best. My family has a certain degree of obligation, right? I mean, there's love, there's obligation, there's desire. Uh, but and that I'm grateful for. I mean, in no way do I take away all that. But the interesting way to look at humanity is when somebody who's not connected to you can feel your pain. I think this incident with this waitress at Bombay Club, I mean, I cried. I mean, it touched me so deeply.
She said she was willing to give up her job and come and live with you to take care of you, right?
Yeah. I mean, and just because she, incredible generosity of the spirit. She'd overheard me at the previous business lunch I was at, perhaps talking about the diagnosis with the colleague or friend I was with. Obviously, I have no recollection of that. But she waited for me to come back, ensured she got my table, served us through the lunch, and only when I was leaving, she said, "Can I talk to you for a moment?" But I've been praying for you. I mean, how does one give thanks to that? How does one? I mean, I've always believed human beings are fundamentally good. There's nobody better than my parents, my brother, my sister-in-law, and my children, of course, right? That's what I believe in because that's what I've witnessed in my life. But when a random stranger gives so much of themselves, I mean, that's to me evidence of the goodness of human beings.
Yes, and even the other instances of the cab driver and waiter. So all very, very fascinating stories, and I'm glad that you remember to record them because these are signs of humanity coming through all these problems. And finally, the pandemic, because that people who have suffered from cancer are particularly susceptible. So how did you deal with that?
It's I remain, as I say, in treatment. And with the treatment, there are ups and there are downs, but mainly hidden, invisible side effects. So enough for you to pretend it's not happening. But when something like except when it gets you, but when the pandemic happened, it brought a degree of consciousness for the vigilance with which we have to live our lives. And
So all of us had a new sense of mortality.
Yes, indeed.
Don't you think? There is that sense, particularly when they said 65 and above.
Yeah.
So people above 65 like me felt that you are particularly vulnerable. Because otherwise you don't plan in terms of the future and you think whatever is to happen, is to happen.
Absolutely.
But this brought in a new reality. I don't know how many colleagues I lost in the last 1 month in Delhi, foreign service officers. Not only that they died, but they died in very miserable circumstances. Died in the parking lot, looking for an oxygen cylinder. So that kind of, and also it's a very lonely experience for them. Nobody, the family cannot be with them. So it's brought in a whole sense of vulnerability to mankind as a whole, right?
It has. And, it comes back to a very fundamental truth that much as we are surrounded by humanity and the goodness of humanity, ultimately, our destiny, our mortality, as much as our capacity, as much as our service is our own. And in that, we're not alone if we believe in something bigger than us. If we can hold on to knowing that we're driven by the goodness of a higher energy. And even in those moments of desperation and helplessness and feeling alone, that we're still held in the palm of God's hand.
But were you not very impatient when a president like Donald Trump, who did not believe in science? I know at least your father was a Democrat, very active Democrat at that. In fact, he introduced me to many Democratic congressmen and senators in your home, outside, raising funds for the Democratic Party and all that. I don't know whether you have a party connection. So, but you must have all been very impatient with an administration which does not believe in science. Even we felt very sad about the United States. But anyway, now you are past that stage and you have a president who is particularly conscious about these dangers and doing his very best.
I think that society is always divided, right? Whether for one reason or another. But when politics comes ahead of humanity and the purpose of leadership, which is to serve, is corrupted by individual greed, that's when citizens have to take responsibility and call it out. And, I do my part in who I vote for and who I campaign for. I'm very grateful for the tide we're in right now, knowing full well tides change. But the most fundamentally important thing is to understand, for me as an American, this is my country, and I will voice my opinion with truth, and I will fight for the best I can for my children. And, God willing, that's a conviction that people all around the world will have one day. They have the conviction. We all have the conviction. It's the challenge remains in the consequence.
Yeah, because unfortunately for politicians, you never know what they bump into. Like, for example, in India, the prime minister has been very popular the first term, second term, but now what you hear is all only his faults. You don't hear anything good about him. And it's not his making. So politicians may be guilty of many things, but they can also be victims of circumstances. And so the whole name of India, everything is getting complicated. People say India is a half a democracy or it's an autocracy and so on. So India is also judged rather sternly by the world. But they expect India to do better than what we have done. And that is what I think has, because I don't think we called America half democracy when it happened there. We didn't.
But I think it absolutely should have been. It absolutely should have been. I think the reality is that when a leader is in position, they're responsible. It doesn't matter whether the issue came before, after, or before, if it's happening during. In that moment, the trust of the people has to be that the leader will take care of all people.
Right.
And if the leader doesn't take care of all people, no matter which country, then the leader has failed. I mean, if you compare the leader in a democracy to a leader in a company, if you lose half your employees in a company and you lose half your revenue, the CEO gets fired.
Absolutely. Yeah, right.
Why should we excuse that when there's a leader of people?
Right. I mean, to conclude then, what is your outlook on life now? What are your objectives, your priorities? It's basically to bring up your children, take care of the family, or do you have professional ambitions which go beyond what you're doing?
I'm sort of ready for my fourth or fifth career. My children are well on their way to living independent lives with God's grace. I intend to continue to stalk and harass and support and be there for my children and my niece and nephew till they no longer need me, and even then, some, God willing. Personally, I think I'm at a place in my life where I'm free. I'm free from judging myself. I'm free from fear. I'm able to bring my truth in a way that allows me to share the good and the bad. I'm really feeling a connection to humanity from a perspective of writing and speaking to these truths. I think that a fundamental message that I have learned in my life is even when you don't have control, you have power. But how you cultivate your power, how you build your power, how do you live from that perspective of power being a good attribute that allows you to make decisions in a way that are sound, compassionate, respectful to yourself as much as to the other, is the space that I want to work in.
Good. And please convey our best regards to your mother, who has been through all this, and she's still very jovial and very strong, and you must consider yourself fortunate that she is around. Is with you.
I speak a lot of my father because
yes, you talk about him as a role model. Yes,
as a role model, and it's the anchor that doesn't get that same glory sometimes. The hero you look up to.
Mothers never seek that. The fathers do. I always say it's because of me that my children are so good.
Yes, but I'm sure they
don't see it that way.
agree. No, I think that I've been given strength and loyalty and courage and the will by my mother.
Absolutely.
She's taught me to fight.
I wish you all the luck, not only in life, but also with the book, because I hope it becomes a bestseller in India and in the United States, and gives you a place in the literary world. That's important also. And consider, have your courage and faith. And finally, Vahe Guru. That's all that I can say. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Uncle. Thank you so much.